Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week, we're talking about the eventual demise of the American comic book. What a depressing subject, Roger. Roger, he's obsessed with death. You have to excuse him. But anyway, let's talk about it. So, we're talking today about this. This is a comic book. This is an awesome comic book, actually. This is Conan, number 96 from 1978. And this is the kind of comic book that I grew up on. These were available everywhere. You can get these, grocery stores, or you can get them at drugstores, or you can get them at convenience stores. They were all over the place. And I used to get them at the 7-Eleven, which is a convenience store that was all over California, and as far as I know, still is. And I used to get these off the spinner rack. This one was still 35 cents. This one was still 35 cents. And they were fantastic. They are fantastic. I love comic books. And this is how comic books for years and years and years and years have been sold. They will come out as these individual small magazine comics. And this is the kind of comic that I grew up on. Over the years, these have changed a lot. And the way they've been sold has changed a lot. And the overall sales of comic books have gone down considerably. And last year, they've really started to, the sales really started to go down on comics, which makes Roger and I speculate on the future of comic books and wonder if these are on their way out. Could it be that we're going to see the day, perhaps in the next 5, 10 years? Are we going to see the end of this kind of comic book? And should we? Has the time of this kind of comic book, has that time passed? Should we move on to something different? Should comic books move on and be sold in a different format than they have been sold for, as long as they've been around? These are all questions. So let's talk a little bit about it and a little bit about the state of comic books. So the first thing to mention is that comic books are not the way they were when I was growing up, which, makes sense. I'm very old and things change. But comic books, they've changed as far as how they're printed and where they're sold. If you look at this, it's a fairly cheap production, really. It looks glorious, but it is printed on, cheap newsprint paper. If you want to go see this movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that looks scary. Anyway, it's printed on cheap newsprint. The range of colors was limited, and it could be a bit smudgy at times. It looks awesome, but the overall printing quality, it wasn't what it has become. Quality has gone up quite a bit. However, that has also meant that the comic books themselves have been a lot more expensive. This is a newer comic book. This is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. It's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. And if you look in here, the production values are much higher. The paper is slick, and it's just has, much higher production values than this one. But then this one costs 35 cents. This one costs $5. And comic books nowadays, I believe, last time I checked, they're running about $4 to $5, depending on the comic book, which is a lot. Back when I was a kid, they were, when I was buying them originally, they were 35. I think they went up to 50 cents after a while. But you could get a pile of these if you were younger. You could just, go to wherever you go and you can get a pile of these. And this comic came out in the 1970s. In the mid-1980s is when I first visited an actual comic book shop. I think it must have been 1985, possibly 86, but I think it was probably 1985. And the comic book shop I visited was in San Leandro. It was the size of a shoebox. It was called the Comic Shop. And it was cool, but that was the first time I actually had a place to go to buy comics specifically. And since then, comic shops have become a thing. And now, if you want to buy a comic book, you pretty much have to go to a comic book shop or order them online. Gone are the days where you could just go to all kinds of different places to buy your comics. And I think that's one of the problems when we're talking about sales of the floppy comics and why the sales have gone down. I think there are actually a number of reasons. There's not just one reason. It's easy to point to certain things. The quality of the stories, some of the editorial decisions when it comes to some of the superheroes that are portrayed in comic books. And those are all valid. Those are all valid reasons. But there are a lot of reasons why comic books have had troubles. Not just because of the way some of the characters have been presented in the comic books. And let's face it, comic books have been plagued with things like that for years. There are a lot of different kinds of comic books. They're not just superhero comic books from the big two companies being DC and Marvel. You also have Image Comics. You also have Dark Horse Comics. You have a bunch of other comic book companies that have independent comics, many of which have proven to be quite successful. But still, Marvel and DC, they still dominate the market. But they've had troubles as far as their storytelling is concerned for a long time. They've relied on gimmicks for decades. One of their gimmicks for the longest time was just, they found out that if you kill a character, your sales go up temporarily. So, just every Marvel character, I believe, has died. I'm pretty sure every Marvel character has died. And they brought them back a few months later, and then their sales bump up a little bit again. Which is short-sighted, but, that's what they do. The problem is that at this point, when you're reading American comic books, the stakes are pretty low. I remember fairly recently, in the last few years, when Superman revealed his secret identity to the world, it was no big deal because, eventually there will be a big retcon and that will go away. I don't know if it has because I stopped reading Superman regularly at that exact point. But because that was just dumb. But, there are no stakes because, no matter what they do in a comic book, it can be reversed and it makes no difference, as far as the character that you're reading about. Those are some of the problems. But there are other problems. And a lot of that has to do with different things like, again, the price. If you're a younger person, like I was when I was first buying comic books, and you're interested in comics, it's a lot more difficult to go to a comic book store and buy a ton of comics because your budget is going to be limited. If you buy a few of these, how much money is that going to set you back? If you're a middle-aged man, as a lot of comic book readers seem to be, maybe that's not such a big deal. But if you're a younger comic book reader, price makes a difference, And I think you could see that in the popularity of manga now. Manga has become a lot more popular, actually, than American comic books. And you can see that when you go to like a Barnes and Noble. I think the last time I went to a Barnes and Noble, it was a while ago. But I remember going in and just the section for manga was huge. It was just huge because manga is so popular. Whereas the section for American graphic novels, kind of small comparatively. And I don't think it's because the manga format is superior. It's not. But it does have a lot of advantages. Manga has a lot of advantages in that it's cheaper because manga is a lot cheaper to produce than, this, because they tend to be black and white. They are reprinted in handy book form, so if you want to start a story, they have a very clear starting point. One of the problems with American comic books, for a lot of American comic books, they've been running for years and years and years and years. And if you're, a character like Superman, they have, you have multiple #1 issues. Where do you start? Whereas manga, you don't really have that issue so much because you pretty much have a clear starting point for a lot of the popular mangas. And there's a lot of variety as far as what you can buy. A lot of the stories are going to be different. They're telling different stories in all the different mangas. There's just a lot of advantages to manga that American comic books, for some reason, are not taking advantage of. And that leads me to another thing about the format itself. Now, a lot of people who are really into comic books will buy monthly comic books every month. That's pretty much what, up to this point, has kept the comic book shops going, right? But a lot of comic book shops nowadays are kind of on life support. And a lot of them have, resorted to selling a lot of things other than comic books. T-shirts, toys, games, and things like that. And sometimes you go into a comic book shop and you're like, well, okay, where the hell are the comics? Oh, they're back there. You want a game or a T-shirt? You do what you've got to do. But a lot of that is because I think a lot of people have left buying monthly comics behind. I certainly have. I left buying monthly comics behind years ago. I've gone back a few times, but I turned into one of those comic book readers who wait for the trade. Most comic books will be reprinted in a trade paperback like this one. And they usually are about this size. This is Superman. And this is a way a lot of comic books get sold now, is that, every comic book will be reprinted into a trade that says like a few issues of Superman. And you can keep up with Superman that way. They also sell these nice hardcovers sometimes. This is the new Superman comic book. It's the newer Superman comic book. It started off with another #1 issue. How many #1s has that been so far for Superman? Anyway, so this is what, #1 to 5 of the new series? This is 1 to 5 of the new series. It starts again, Superman. Again, the printing quality is beautiful. I mean, it looks wonderful, this comic book. Haven't read it yet. I've heard good things. But, I didn't have to buy the individual issues. I just waited. I just picked this up. It's a handy, durable format. This will be reprinted in trade paperback. So, there's that. And actually, graphic novels tend to sell pretty well. Much more, I think graphic novels, they sell on average better than the Floppies do at this point. Which makes me wonder, what is going to happen in the future? Are these comic books, floppy comic books, just going to go away? Because I think about scenarios about what's going to happen with comic books in the future. If the decline continues, and I see that happening because, like I said, these aren't sold anywhere except for comic book stores for the most part. Comic book stores, or you can get them online. But you don't see these anyplace else. You're not going to go to the 7-Eleven and find this on the spinner rack, most likely. That's just not going to happen. And so what happens when we have fewer comic book shops and you have places, a lot of places, most places perhaps, that do not have comic book shops at all? They're not going to buy them because they're not available. If comic books are just nowhere around, you're not going to buy them, but you can go down to any bookstore anywhere and get a manga. If that kind of thing continues and a new distribution system doesn't come up for comic books, then yeah, I think in a few years we might see the end of these. And for diehard comic book collectors, that's bad news because a lot of people love these. Certainly bad news for comic book shops because so far these, have been they're the main reason they're still around. If you don't get new comic books in, there go your customers. But it seems to me there is a chance that these just might go away in this kind of format. And what would happen? What would happen with comic books? Well, there might be some advantages, actually, as a comic book reader. Like I said, if you start reading manga, there's a clear entry point for whatever manga series you're reading. This has always been difficult, or has been difficult for the past several decades in American comics. But that's not because people are not interested. And that has changed since graphic novel collections have come around. If you're interested in the Fantastic Four, for example, you can start at the beginning. You can get this. This is the Marvel Epic Collection for the Fantastic Four, Volume 1. You can start at the beginning. And this is from the Marvel Epic Collection series. These sell like crazy. These sell really, really well. A Marvel Epic Collection, when they get printed, they're going to sell out. Even if they're crappy, But they're going to sell out because people are interested. And it's not just, middle-aged guys like me. A lot of people are interested. A lot of comic book fans of all ages and all genders are interested. And that's why these are selling. This is a way you could start at the beginning, just like if it was a manga. And they're nice, and the printing quality is really great. So it makes me wonder if perhaps in the future what might happen is that floppy comics, our beloved floppies, might go away entirely, and we will just have trades printed, or hardcovers printed that come out. I couldn't see them coming out monthly, but you could see like a quarterly trade paperback of Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or whoever you're reading. I could see that happening in the future. And I wonder if that is not going to be the ultimate fate of these characters. I don't think that's on the immediate horizon, although it could be coming soon. Like I said, if the way things are going continue to go the way they are, that might be a way that the comic book companies go, because they're all owned by big corporations. And eventually they're going to want to find different ways to actually make money on these characters. And like I said, graphic novels tend to do fairly well. So that might be what eventually happens. These might just die altogether. Comics will continue, but they might continue in a different format. And it's interesting to speculate on what kind of format that might be. And then these could be sold anywhere, bookstores, the Target, wherever, And then more people might have access to the newer stories, original stories in trade paperback. That might be what happens. But we will see. I'm really bad at predicting the future, as I discovered a couple presidential elections ago. But we will see. We will see. Anyway, that's our speculation for the day, and we've gone on long enough. You know, you've got to stop talking for so long, Roger. This guy never shuts up. I will catch you next time.